we all know the power of video and the engagement from video and why it's so compelling. It's authentic. It is a way to see and feel and experience a brand through a person or through people. We all understand kind of what is attractive and appealing of video. But if you're using kind of a standard video, it's only a one-way communication. You can't have that two-way back and forth. And I think the magic and the beauty of webinars is, first and foremost, a webinar is a video.
You're listening to Content Logistics, a podcast for B2B marketers where we explore the foundational and sometimes frustrating elements of content. We're talking to the experts, learning all their tips and tricks. We don't gatekeep here. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Content Logistics. In this episode, we're going to talk about why webinars aren't dead and why they are the king of B2B engagement. As someone who is podcasting, this was such an interesting topic to learn about. We have a very special guest, Lindsay McGuire. She is the Associate Director of Content and Campaigns at Goldcast. So she really is an expert in webinars, and it has so many great ideas and strategies on how to incorporate webinars and a marketing strategy. In this episode, we talk about how to build content, how to build an audience for webinars, and just some really useful strategies and the logistics of all that happening behind the scenes. So let's get into it. Hey, Lindsay, welcome to Content Logistics. We're so excited to have you here today. For our listeners who aren't quite as familiar with your story, do you mind just giving them a bit of a background on your current role at Goldcast and how you got involved in webinars?
Yeah, so I am the Associate Director of Content Campaigns at Goldcast. We're an AI-powered video platform that allows you to be able to essentially craft your whole content strategy around things like webinars, virtual events, and podcasts. And then not only have that fuel your content strategy, but be able to repurpose those assets throughout the rest of your campaigns as well. So a really great job for a marketer, a lot of fun for a marketer. And that is really what brought me into kind of the webinar space, is taking on this role and selling a product that began as a webinar tool built specifically for B2B marketers and now has expanded into kind of encompassing a lot more channels of video in general.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about this today. I am very passionate about video content. Webinars, I'm not I don't have as much experience in. A little bit during COVID that I think maybe other marketers can probably relate to. That was a lot of us were forced to do webinars during that time. Anyway, but webinars have been around for a really long time and they're still going strong. Why do you think webinars are such a prominent marketing strategy? And why do you think they're still effective today?
Yeah, it gives you a two-way street with your audience, right? We all know the power of video and the engagement from video and why it's so compelling. It's authentic. It is a way to see and feel and experience a brand through a person or through people. We all understand kind of what is attractive and appealing of video. But if you're using kind of a standard video, it's only a one-way communication. You can't have that two-way back and forth. And I think the magic and the beauty of webinars is, first and foremost, a webinar is a video. Some people don't think it that way, like that light bulb doesn't come on, but like a webinar is a video. But it's a way to have video in a way that's interactive and that you can use as a two-way street with your audience. And it's a great way to build that brand affinity, that trust, that respect, the kind of I'm going to come back to you time and time again vibes that you want as a brand building piece of your marketing strategy. Because if you have the right webinar tool or software, it's going to allow you to be able to run polls and get answers, have surveys and get real live feedback from your audience. You're going to have a chat that's popping off that you can literally engage with your people. And even like platforms like Goldcast, I can bring people from the audience up on stage so that they're part of the programming, they're part of the experience. So there's so many ways that you can use, and I hate the word webinar. Like, it sounds so dated. I mean, I guess it's better than webcast. Webcast is definitely like the step below webinar. I like webinar is just such a term to me, but your virtual events. I think that's a sexier term, a more fun
Yeah.
term, because a webinar is a virtual event. Not all virtual events are webinars, all the yada yada. But
Yeah.
I think virtual events are a great way to use video, scale video, and make video much more accessible.
Okay, wow. There's so many things to pick apart from that. I'm really excited. First off, I want to say I feel the same way about sometimes we have these words that are taboo in our industry. Like I feel the same way about podcasts. I'm like, I say the word podcast, I'm like, oh, so much work. That sounds awful. And I feel like there's probably a lot of that same sentiment with webinars. So today, there's lots we're going to talk about. I want to talk about first building an audience. I feel like that is one of the bigger, maybe the biggest challenges of to overcome when starting a webinar. And then we're also going to talk about the content, how to build great content like you mentioned before, how can you engage your audience, make it interactive, things like that. And then we'll just wrap up with the logistics and the tips you have for creating a great webinar. So let's start with that, building an audience. I guess first off, do you feel like this is probably the biggest obstacle? Is there something else that is harder than building an audience?
I mean, live event production in and of itself is a new level of stress that nobody understands until they do it. So I'll say maybe that's like the step above it. But other than that, yes, every marketer who is running some kind of webinar program, their main concern is going to be getting butts and seats, and even if you're doing like live events, it's the same thing. It really is across the events industry as a whole, whether it's in person, virtual, webinar, hybrid, whatever it is. It's always getting those butts in the seat, theoretically speaking. And it's kind of a twofold thing because you want to get all the registrations you can, because then your brand is getting a higher reach and you're getting in front of more people and they're giving you that, I'm going to use a buzzword, intense signal that they're interested in your content and they're interested in your brand and what you're putting out there. But then there's that second step, or that, kind of hand in hand data point of, well, it's not only about getting that high registration, you also want that high attendance rate, because
Mm,
you get 1,000 registrants, but only like 100 people show up, like something's off, something's awry.
yeah.
So it's definitely a twofold thing you're thinking about, I'll say. And it could be a problem, it could be a challenge, however you want to frame it. And part of it too is knowing that the way that social media is going, the way that search is going, the way all of these platforms that we rely on to build audiences are shrinking our ability to own those audiences. We're in the era of zero-click content where they don't want to give priority to your links or your external content or pushing people back to your website or your webinar registration page or whatever it might
Yes.
be. And so now we're forced to figure out the ways to build those audiences with those channels in a way that is different than we've done for like years and years and years. And I think a big part of that is your repurposing strategy. So it's figuring out, how do you repurpose the content you're making, putting it out on your social channels, on whatever channels you're using to reach your audience, and have them compelled to then figure out how to be at that, let's say in this instance, webinar, right? Or it could even be a
Yeah.
podcast, could be a virtual summit, like whatever it is. So I think a lot of the audience building piece of it is really based in your repurposing strategy and how you are getting that content out in front of people to then compel them to be like, oh, that was good, or that was smart, or that was intriguing, or whatever it might be. And then kind of the flip side of that is you also have to like deliver on what you're promising. So from the get-go, you have to position that reg page or that entry page or your marketing email or whatever it is to align with the content that you're sharing. Because nothing feels crappier than like you read this reg page for this event, you're like, oh yeah, sounds great. And you get in and then it doesn't deliver on anything. And you're like, I just spent an hour here. What am I doing with my life?
Yeah. I first want to touch on your repurposing strategy. First off, I love this. I feel very similarly like having this podcast. I'm like, if zero people listen to it, I still have a purpose for this show. One, because I love talking to you. I love talking to all my guests. I learn so much from them, but also I can repurpose this content in so many different ways that hopefully I love my listeners. I'm very grateful for them. It's great, but there's so many other purposes that even if you get 0 people to come to your webinar, you can still use that content that you built.
Oh, 1,000,000%, 1,000,000%. And that is also an interesting thing that has come up more and more over the last few years as people have really like realized like, oh, it's not just about the live moment, right? It's not this one singular moment in time. If you play it right, it can be an infinity moment in time, which is kind of a weird meta thing to think about. But if you play it right, if you position it correctly, if you approach it with repurposing in mind from the beginning of when you're crafting this content, you can fuel yourself for months, for years. I don't want to say decades because we all know stuff's not lasting that long for the most part.
Yeah.
But and then also if you find the right tools, obviously working at Goldcast, I have access to our content lab, which is an excellent content repurposing tool. But if you have access to the right tools, then you can also have these workflows built into your systems and processes. So it's simple and easy to do every time. And it's just another step in your process. It's a drumbeat. And you don't have to drive yourself crazy thinking like, oh my God, now I have to repurpose this hour-long podcast or webinar. What am I going to do? Like it just gets built into your flows and kind of your strategy overall as well.
Yeah. It can become, maybe the first one is a bit more high effort, but after that, you can really build a system and it's a lot easier. I might want to take a step back real quick before we keep talking about audience, but webinars maybe aren't for everyone. So I maybe want to put that out there. Like, who do you think webinars work well for, and maybe the kinds of businesses that might want to go a different route?
That's a really good question. I would say most people can probably figure out a way to use webinars in a smart and strategic way. I would say maybe if you're an organization that has to show a lot of physical, real things, like if you're a manufacturer of something, maybe webinars aren't really your jam because it's kind of maybe not as cool to just hold up that thing in a little box and so that might not be that effective. But I think most organizations have some kind of topics that they want to be a thought leader in, or they have SMEs who have such great information about the vertical they serve or the people they serve. So I think in some way, shape, or format, it's kind of like asking like, I mean, this is kind of going to date me, I guess, but like, like, oh, what company shouldn't use a blog? And it's like, well, probably everyone can find a way to use a blog. It's just really like what you're actually writing about and what you're sharing about through your blog, right? So I think
Yeah.
it kind of like fits in that same mindset of, for the most part, I think everyone probably could spin up a webinar strategy. I think the biggest difference is going to be who's involved in that webinar strategy, what's the content and the purpose of that webinar strategy, and who are you reaching with that webinar content, and kind of what is the purpose of that webinar programming. I think that those are the things that will differentiate the most from business to business, vertical to vertical. But at the end of the day, I think most organizations can think about what they want to be known for or what they want their audience to turn to them for, and they can figure out a way to spin up some kind of programming, video-based webinars or podcasts or things like that would work.
Yeah. That's awesome. I think that, and when we talked earlier, I know you mentioned that having like a consistent event for people to come up to. So anyone who has a sales pipeline, if you have your sales team asking you, "Hey, like how can I get my people more engaged?" Webinars are a great thing, or live events or whatever you're doing, just to keep them engaged in whatever you're doing. And well, a big part of this podcast too is we like to work with small scrappy teams. That is, I mean, a lot of companies are going through budget cuts and just having to work with small teams. So I think, as we're just chatting, Lindsay, I know you're catering this, but I just want to make sure we keep in mind like those teams that maybe don't have all the resources, but like you said before, there's so many different ways you can repurpose. Like I love when we do one big effort and so much can come from it.
Oh, yeah. If you are a small team with either limited resources, limited people, time, budgets, maybe all of the above, then being a video first strategy is great. And I don't think a lot of people think about webinars can be the basis of your video first strategy. Because think about it, you can record a 1 hour webinar once a month or every other month. And you can then have video content to fuel all your social media, your YouTube. You can repurpose those videos into blog posts. You can create like email nurtures or campaigns off that content. Like it just waterfalls into everything else. And probably half of, if not more, depending on kind of what we're doing that month, of our content we're doing each month is coming off the basis of the webinars we're hosting. Of course, take it with a grain of salt. I work for a webinar company. So obviously we're webinar led, video first and things like that. But it's possible. And once you get started and once you kind of figure out the logistical pieces to make it flow from month to month or quarter to quarter or whatever your cadence, it just becomes part of like your DNA and it gets so much easier every time you do it too.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like marketers are totally on board with this, and I 100% agree. Sometimes the harder part is getting buy-in from the rest of the team. I don't want to dwell too much here, though. We'll bring it back to building an audience. So when we talked about before, you mentioned leveraging an owned audience. Do you mind describing that?
Yeah, so kind of what I was alluding to earlier in our conversation, the idea that you don't really own your audience on the other platforms that you're running through, right? Like you have to rely on algorithms or you have to rely on money. And a lot of us, our budgets are not expanding. If anything, they're staying stagnant or they're reducing, especially for the more costly, ad streams and things like that. Cough, cough, LinkedIn, which is so expensive sometimes. Holy moly, y'all. But anyways, so you don't really own your audiences on those other platforms, right? You're going to have to play the game with either money or an algorithm, which changes like every 2 seconds sometimes. And even the same too when you think about SEO and now more than ever, because now SEO, you're not even just faced with the issues of just algorithms and Google being Google. You now are facing the challenges of Google's own AI taking a slice of the pie, and then all the rest of the AI garbage that's also ruining search for everybody. And so TLDR is that you have to build your own audience to be able to then tap into them when you want and how you want, because all those other channels you're playing by someone else's game. So I think right now what's really hot for a lot of marketers, especially in B2B, is newsletters and using that as a channel to own your audience. But webinars are another great way to own an audience too, right? Webinars are one of the last pieces of content where people are not going to scoff at a form. And I will challenge anyone on that, because you get your calendar invite, you get your confirmation email, you get a few reminders. It's a specialty event. And so it's going to be treated with a higher caliber and you're not going to mind so much that form fill, as long as you don't have like 20 forms, right? Or
Yeah.
fields. If you have 20 fields, then yes, people are going to be like, WTF, no, thank you. I don't need to sell my first child to you. So bye. But, if you have a run of the mill form on that, then people aren't going to scoff at that. And then you now have that person, whether it's going to then be an offer to your newsletter, if you have a newsletter, or if you have a recurring kind of outreach list to those people who have visited your webinars before and attended your webinars. But it's another way to be able to build that relationship with people, especially if you have recurring content. So Goldcast for a long time ran a lot of recurring shows to do exactly what you did of, we always have something on to invite someone to. So if someone's a new lead, if someone's just newly found out about Goldcast, if sales is trying to convince someone to have a conversation, they always have somewhere to bring people to. So we ran for a long time, we ran CMO diaries, I want to say almost like weekly at one point too. We did our Event Marketers Live, which was twice a month for a very long time. And then we ran our Donuts and Demand show. So we always had something happening that was like an authentic, real moment in time that people could look forward to, get an invite to, feel special that, oh, hey, like I know you like XYZ. This episode of Donuts and Demand is talking about just that. Would love to see you there. So it's a great way to build that audience and have that, I don't want to say ownership because that sounds weird, but like ownership there, right? There's like some responsibility for you then to craft great content to keep those people engaged and coming back.
That's so smart. First off, I love that so much. Recurring events can be so helpful for getting sales and just engagement there. So you kind of, it sounds like we kind of divide this audience into an owned audience. So those are maybe people you have emails for or you're actively talking with, and then we have like a secondary audience that's maybe through an algorithm or paid media. Is that recapping this right?
I would say so. And of course, some people are going to overlap and things like that. But
Yeah.
there's always going to be the people that you can do your direct outreach to because they've opted in, no matter what that opt in is, right? And then it's everybody else that you're trying to reach that, you're just going to have to hope that something about that LinkedIn post, registers and it gets more reach than the last one and all those things.
Yeah. It is a bit of more of a gamble with that. One thing that when I've done events, we try and get like our friendlies to come. So whether that's clients you already have or just people that you know will be engaged, especially when you're just first launching, can be really helpful just to get over that starting hump.
Oh, yeah. You should always be doing outreach for every event you're running, of inviting people that you know are going to support you and champion you and light up that chat when you need it and, be your cheerleader too, because it's just an extra way to kind of show social proof as well, right? So,
Yeah.
getting more people out there talking about your brand, talking about your events, supporting what you're doing, influencer marketing in its purest
Yeah.
form, I guess.
Yeah, the original influencers. Okay, well, Lindsay, do you have any other thoughts on building an audience or any other tips?
Just really think about what your audience wants and needs and being able to deliver on that. And that is why I have loved the past year and a half of developing a webinar strategy and webinar programming, because it has really given me so many opportunities. And as a content marketer, this is like pure gold, to hear directly from my audience of like what topics they're interested, what are their main challenges, where are the gaps in their knowledge or what we're offering to them. And so to be able to have so many recurring opportunities to hear about that, whether through surveys or polls or chats or DMs during events. One thing I love to do is, like, today we had our spotlight event, which is our quarterly product event that talks about what we've released, what's upcoming on the roadmap, what future things are coming into beta or GA. And I have loved to be able to just sit there and just watch our customers interact in the chat. And then someone's going to drop a beautiful gem about either a use case that they're doing that's cool. And I'm like, I want to write a story about that. Or they, provide a great testimonial. I'm like, I want to put that on the website. And it gives you like that moment where I can literally in that second DM that person, be like, hey, this is awesome. Can I use this? Or can we chat or whatever it is? And like, there you go. Right. And so I think it's also thinking about opportunities like that and how other people in your organization, because that's not even an event I run. It's not an event I run. It's not an event I own. It's one our product team does alongside our product marketing team. And so it's not even like it's an event from me. It's another team's event, but I can still benefit from it in
Yeah.
my work. So I think thinking about the holistic usage of, how can webinars be used to build that audience in other ways that isn't necessarily like the content you're creating, maybe necessarily.
Yeah. I think, well, that segues perfectly into what we're going to talk about next is building good, engaging content. I have just a little funny story I want to tell you. When I was
Let's go.
18, my friend invited me to this event. She's like, "You're going to learn so much. It's going to be so fun." And I got there and I was like, "They're trying to get me to join an MLM." Like,
Oh no. Oh no. We've all been there though. We've all been there. It's
yeah,
awful.
because that happened to everyone. I felt so dumb afterwards. But I think it's like the expectation versus the actual event. I was like, yeah, that was bad for me. But I think it comes into play with webinars. Like, we want the expectation. Well, we hope the actual event exceeds what the expectation was. But so, what
Whew.
tips do you have on that?
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. I think when you boil it down in this situation, the conversation is usually, how do I balance between authentic, engaging, fun, entertaining content while still meeting my business goals and my intentions of this programming, which is to sell whatever you're selling, right? Like at the end of the
Yeah.
day, us brand marketers can like be like, oh, it's just brand, it's just brand, it's just brand. But like at the end of the day, you're really trying to sell something,
Yeah.
regardless of, the intention or what the content is. So I think trying to find ways to organically place your product, organically place your brand where it feels authentic, it feels helpful versus like, oh, I just got swindled and now I'm in, an MLM or a pyramid scheme discussion and they're offering me a $200 bottle of tequila to sell my soul or whatever it is. Um so I think it needs to be positioned in a way where your main goal is helping your audience learn whatever it is that you positioned that content to be around and staying true to that and delivering on that. But then also finding creative, fun, engaging ways to weave your company or your product or your service in where it makes sense. So I can give a few examples just to kind of paint this
Yeah.
picture in a very realistic way. So one way we've done this in the past is our recurring webinar series is called Goldcast Insider. It's all about AI, video, webinar, and event marketing. And I want to say our August episode was all about infusing AI with your brand voice. So we had two
Ooh.
leading AI experts on a panel discussion. We got their thoughts and opinions, prompts, workflows, tools, all those kind of things to share with the audience. And then kind of halfway through that, sandwiched between the panel discussion and then the open Q&A with our audience, we brought up a new feature from Goldcast that related into the topic of the event and was actually
Wow.
a helpful tool related to what we were talking about. It's our brand voice profile where you can train Goldcast Content Lab to learn essentially your brand's voice, but we didn't just do like
Whoa.
a boring demo and just like show the tool because like that would feel that weird cringe MLM moment. It would get
Yeah.
awkward, right? And like, what's happening? So instead, we got really fun with it and we uploaded Snoop Dogg's LinkedIn profile to it and we did a Snoop Dogg brand voice. Or
How
another
awesome.
instance, or another like a way we've done this too is we had an event called the Content Resurrection. It was all about how to repurpose the video content living the depths of your Google Drive because we all have it. We've all been there. There's probably some files even screaming at me for as much repurposing as I do. And on the one that we talked about, brand voice, style, how to train AI, I actually did a video for both of our guest panelists during that episode, bringing in their content into the tool and making their own brand voice. And they didn't know I was going to do it. So it was like a surprise
What?
and delight. Yeah. See? And so, like, you get some like warm fuzzies and it's like a cool moment. And there's like a moment of surprise and delight. And it's not just like,
Yeah.
oh God, they're going to sell me something. Oh no. So it's the balance between delivering on the promise of what you're teaching your audience and then interweaving your brand, product, service in a way that still feels like a television show or still feels like
Yeah.
a presentation or an event. And maybe presentation's the wrong word with like our conversation around, skeezy presentations.
That's so clever. I need to see these webinars. I want to see the Snoop Dogg presentation.
I can send you the links.
Yes,
They're all available on
please.
demand.
That's so fun. Just talking of that, I guess what is your distribution strategy after you create a webinar? Is the webinar gated? How are you distributing it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the gate or ungate is forever a conversation, right? And we even still go through it from time to time here. So, majority of our webinars are gated, but we do that because our distribution strategy is so strong that we have a lot of channels to push people back to the original content. And by the time they get there, they're likely bought in enough to like do the form fill, right?
Yeah.
They've seen enough of the content. They're like, oh, okay, this seems valuable. This seems relevant. Oh, I do want to learn more about XYZ topic. So, how it works is webinar shuts down, curtains fall. Okay, now we're giving it all the rest of its life post live event moment. So, first off, what we'll do is I intentionally do all my housekeeping and like live event mode stuff at the beginning. And then I reinsert an intro slide and I redo my intro on the episode because
Brilliant.
then I can tell my video editor, and actually, once we have a few extra tools in Content Lab, I can do it myself. But I tell my video
Mm,
editor, okay, at 3 minutes and 26 seconds, you're going to actually cut to then because then it feels like an authentic video to my audience. Like, no one's going to sit through like 3 to 5 minutes of housekeeping if it's irrelevant. You know
No.
what I mean?
Yeah.
So we've started now putting in another like transition slide to indicate like the beginning of the like on-demand video.
Oh,
So
okay.
the first step is to cut the video so it's in its like on-demand version, because you don't need your live event stuff anymore, right? I don't need to tell
Yeah.
you interact in the chat or, put in your Q&A, because that doesn't exist anymore. So then after that, we get very strategic and we identify like 2 or 3, depending on the length of the content, obviously, 2 or 3 clips of anywhere from like 3 to 7 or 8 minutes. We use those embedded in blog posts because we repurpose each webinar into at least one blog post, if not multiple blog posts. We'll put those longer clips on our YouTube and then embed them into those blog posts. And then, of course, that YouTube video and the blog post are all driving then to that on demand page to get people to then get past that gate and watch the full episode. We'll also cut them into shorts to use on our YouTube channel. We're not much of an Instagram company, so not a lot of this is going to go to Instagram. It's really just going to go to YouTube. What's also nice too is that we are customers of The Juice, which is a B2B marketing kind of like curation of content tool. And so anything we upload on our YouTube channel also gets pulled into The Juice and gets distributed to all the marketers on The Juice, which is, I think, more than 100,000. So that's a
Wow.
great like cycle there. And then, of course, we're going to repurpose those videos onto our LinkedIn. Our sales team is going to do some strategic outreach for people who either hit the demo button or we're asking like very specific product questions, or they know are in like, a disco or a prospect or whatever level of their relationship. So there's a lot of ways that we then repurpose and reuse that content. And then every piece kind of goes through that same workflow over and over and over again.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I love this is so cohesive. It's all really working towards this same goal of getting the webinar out and ultimately getting to sales, right? But I love how it's all working together.
Yeah, and one thing to consider too is the fact that all of this also can intertwine into your SEO strategy. As we've kind of chatted a little bit about, organic is just all over the place. It's a wild west right now. No
Yeah.
one knows what's going to happen next. The last 2 algorithm changes have been absolute crazy roller coasters. And I've seen a lot of algo changes in my time. And so I think thinking about your webinar and your video content in a way that it correlates to your SEO strategy, YouTube is the next. I don't want to say final frontier, because it's never final, right? We're marketers. We're
Yeah.
going to find some other way to weasel ourselves in somewhere. But like YouTube is the next frontier, I think, for B2B marketers, because it is somewhat untapped in a variety of ways. And for us, we haven't really leaned too hard into like a native LinkedIn LinkedIn, a native YouTube strategy, but we have leaned into it as part of our SEO strategy. And so your webinars can be a great way to fuel that in a easier, less time intensive way, I think.
Yeah. Because I love how they can all play together with your SEO strategy because it is tough right now. It's very competitive.
It's a hot mess right now.
Yeah. I love your ideas of making engaging content. I think I told you this before, but nobody wants to go to a webinar that's just a thinly veiled sales pitch. But what you said before of just making sure you can organically and naturally integrate your product or service into that webinar in a way that's creative. Those are some really great ideas.
And just be fun about it, right? Like that's why people like video, is because it's fun and you can see people's personalities, and it's, that Netflix like experience to some extent. And so
Yeah.
like have fun with it. Like they know you have to sell. Like at the end of the day, we know you have to sell something. You are selling something. So just like not make fun in like a haha, I'm making fun of this, but like make it engaging, and it doesn't have to be dry and stuffy, right? Like
Yeah.
when I mention our like demo button or whatever text and terminology is on that button in our Goldcast events, like I'm not going to be like, okay, now buy my product, just click that button. Like, no, I'm going to make it like fun or funny or
Yeah.
catchy, or like pull it into what we're talking about, make it a little sassy, because like that's what's engaging. And so just
Yeah.
finding ways to make it a little more, I don't know, lighthearted maybe is the great word to use here.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. There's a better way to do it for sure than just a sales pitch. So let's get into a bit of the logistics of how to make this happen. What what tips do you have? How can we make video content engaging? Maybe let's think about a person who is maybe a little nervous to get on camera. What tips do you have to help them get started?
Yeah, getting started is going to be one of the hardest things you do. So know that. And then once you get started, it's likely going to get easier from there. So I think that's a great thing to keep in mind, first and foremost. I would say the best thing to do is do some training and some practicing. That's the best way to get comfortable. It's the easiest way to get comfortable. So it's probably a mix of doing your research, maybe doing some tutorials or classes or figuring out what's going to make you feel like you can do this. For some people, that might be getting the right products. Maybe you want to get a nice camera or a good mic, or you just want to get your lighting set up or your background set up. And like it's a lot about confidence and like feeling
Yeah.
comfortable and confident. And so figuring out what that is about yourself that's going to make you feel like, oh, I can do this, or like I'm excited to do this, instead of like dreading it, right? That's important. Maybe it's you figure out like, your right color that like just makes you feel like, oh,
Mhm.
this is a great color on me, or like I feel like I look really great. Things like that can help you get comfortable. Practicing, whether it's just jumping on a call with someone and like mock presentation style it or whatever,
Yeah.
watching yourself is also a great thing to do. You will quickly learn what words are your trap words. Like I say gonna so much, and I also say so much. And I try to work on it, but it's just some character flaws, whatever. But I
Yeah.
think also listening to yourself, watching yourself, and some people this will like raise their anxiety. So I think it all comes back to what works best for you. And everyone is going to be slightly different on what they find helpful and valuable and what they find like hurtful and almost like detrimental to, progressing their journey. So no,
Yeah.
it's a really personal thing, because being on video can be very vulnerable, can be very
Mhm.
scary, can feel high pressure, it can give you anxiety. And so just know those are normal feelings, especially if you're just getting started. And some of those feelings might never go away too, right? So just be at peace with that. Of course, if it's too much and it doesn't go away, then maybe video's not the right format for you. And that's okay. Like there's a lot of people where they will never ever want to get in front of a camera and do
Yeah.
something like that. So I think that's something important to think about too, because the more you force yourself to do it, and if you continue that and you're not lessening those other things that are making it difficult or like just making you feel uncomfortable, then don't force it, right? Don't force
Yeah.
it. Find other ways and other vehicles or other things. Maybe it's, you're comfortable on video if you're doing like a screen share and you're just tiny in the corner,
Mhm.
just maybe find other ways you can integrate video in a way that feels less pressure or less all encompassing to you. I don't know if those
Yeah.
are helpful tips or not, and I can keep going, but
Those are no, I think those are great tips. I can relate to a lot of those things, especially when I first got started with this show. I was very nervous to have a video show. There feels like a little bit more pressure, but I was like, I'm just going to start. And I had a vision for what my background was going to look like, but I was like, I'm not going to let the medium get in the way of starting this. So I think I did like 6 or something whatever episodes before I was like, "Okay, now I feel a bit more confident. Let's invest in some equipment and make my setup look a little bit nicer." And sometimes you just gotta try it out and test yourself a little and then you can go all out.
yes. And no, too, when you start out, that's going to be the worst stuff you ever create. So once you like created that stuff, got it out of the way, like you're good, right? It's
Yeah,
only better
exactly.
from there. So look on the bright side.
Yeah, you can delete it later. It's fine.
That's true. You can always delete it. You don't have to publish. Like, I think that's the difference between like, because people a lot of times will ask me, like, well, what's the difference really between podcasts and webinars? And like, they're starting to meld so much. And it's like, Well, a podcast, you could literally record a whole episode and no one has to even know you did it. If it goes awry or it's just total garbage, like, there's a lot more flexibility than, you're in front of a group of hundreds or thousands. That's the
Yep,
difference.
that's the difference. See, this way is way better for me. No audience. Live audience, at least.
Yeah, I
Um,
feel you.
and I think even if, like, the episode or the webinar as a whole is a flop, you probably at least got a few good clips, like, a few good nuggets from it.
True. There's always something
Yeah,
salvageable somewhere.
exactly. Okay. Well, as we're coming up on time here, Lindsay, do you have any other thoughts or tips for our listeners?
Oh man. Well, what direction do you think is most valuable? Give me some guardrails because I can go all sorts of ways.
We could go crazy. I think, well, I'll tell you my favorite, the last question we always ask, so I think we'll end on a funny note, is what is your biggest content marketing ick? So, like, what do you see? And maybe this is related to webinars. Like, what do you see that people do and you're like, "Ooh, that's not great."
Oh my gosh, my biggest content marketing ick. Like, okay, this isn't even a webinar one, but this is just like a personal thing that's driven me crazy my whole life. And granted, it might because I have a degree in journalism from Mizzou. And so I am hardcore, always will be very like indebted into like J school learnings and things. And like, sometimes the way people format their content, I'm just like, what is happening here? Like you spent like 2 seconds and you're just like blah, 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 and it's just like to me, like, and this is probably the one area that I'm most inefficient sometimes, but it's for a reason because I think like the layout of content is so important and the styling of content is
Mm.
so important. And like extra line breaks, no line breaks, 3 images topped on top of each other. Like sometimes it's such like chaos. And then you also get pissed off because you're like, Google, you gave this as like, my third recommendation on page one. Like, what the fuck is happening? Oh, excuse the language, but like, oh, that just irks me. It icks me. It just all the feelings because it's almost like people don't care about the experience of their reader. And it's like, well, you spent time putting this content together. It deserves just as much attention on the layout and formatting as it does of the words. Like,
Yeah.
ooh, ooh. And I don't think that's the one we originally talked about, but you know what? That's my vibe today.
That's the mood. You saw an ugly blog post and we're like, this
Oh, honey, what you
yeah.
doing?
I love that. I come from like a video and design background, so I'm right there with you. I'm like, it's gotta look nice. It's gotta put some thought into it.
Yeah, yeah, it's just and sometimes you're just like, "What was this person thinking?" Like
They probably weren't thinking. That's
Oh,
what
that's true.
happened. They threw it just into the template and
And, like, I'm
something.
a big person about
Yeah.
editing too, and it's just like, "Wow, where was your editor?" Or, like, your QA-er? Like, "What's happening here?"
That's so funny. Well, Lindsay, where can people go to learn more about you?
Yeah, best place is LinkedIn. That's kind of my home away from home per se. Don't be alarmed. I have a different name in the slug of my LinkedIn. It's going to say Lindsay Latteru. Apparently, I never updated it to my married name. So it's just my homage to, my original OG name. Type in Lindsay McGuire. You'll find me on LinkedIn. Please DM me, connect with me, message me if you have questions about video and webinars and repurposing strategies. I'm happy to talk more about all those things and a whole lot more.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Lindsay, for being on the show today. We'll make sure to link your profile in the show notes for anyone who wants to connect. And just thanks again. I learned so much in this and it had so much fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Baylee. It was a great time. And I hope people learned a lot of golden nuggets today. So,
I think they will for sure. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Content Logistics. Make sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss the next episode. Bye!